For our first wedding anniversary, my mother-in-law offered to bring the cake, but when she opened the box, everyone went silent. It read, "Cheers to 365 days of gold digging." She laughed it off, saying it was just a harmless joke. You are not going to believe what happened at my first wedding anniversary party. My mother-in-law, the woman who had always seemed to despise me, volunteered to bring our cake, but when she unboxed it, the message written across it made my blood run cold and left everyone in absolute shock. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated humiliation, and it forced me to finally expose the real reason her own husband had left her just months before. Now, she's threatening to sue me for defamation. From the very first time I met my mother-in-law, it was painfully obvious she had a problem with me. This wasn't just a personality clash, it was like she instantly saw me as some kind of threat, for reasons I still can't fully grasp. She seemed to view me as competition when it came to her son, almost as if my presence would diminish her role in his life. Instead of just letting things be, she'd constantly try to put me down, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly. It became clear very early on that her issue with me wasn't going away. Now, if you're wondering why I went ahead and married my husband, Kane, if his mother was such a nuisance, it's because Kane has always stood up for me. Every single time his mother tried to belittle or insult me, he was right there, firmly on my side, telling her to stop. It's one of the main reasons I felt confident moving forward with our relationship, even with her negativity hanging over us. He's never let her get away with her hurtful behavior, and he always makes it clear that we're a team. Of course, my mother-in-law resents me even more because of this. The fact that her son doesn't allow her to undermine me seems to add fuel to her fire. For a bit of background, Kane and I got married last year, and just this past week, we celebrated our first wedding anniversary. Kane is the kind of husband who loves to go all out for special occasions, and he planned a truly grand anniversary party for me. It was completely unplanned on my part. I didn't expect such a big celebration, but Kane had decided to invite all our friends and family, making sure it would be a memorable event. On the actual day of the anniversary, everything seemed to be going perfectly. However, there was a small hiccup. We received word that there had been a logistics issue with the cake, and it couldn't be delivered to the venue. Instead, it had to be picked up in person. The bakery was pretty far away, and while Kane could have gone to get it himself, we didn't want him to be away for that long since he had worked so hard to plan the party and wanted to stay to greet guests. So, we decided to reach out to our family in a group text, asking if anyone would be willing to pick up the cake for us. We were even prepared to compensate them for their trouble, since the bakery was quite a distance. My mother-in-law, surprisingly, volunteered to help. She assured us she would take care of it and make sure to bring the cake to the party safely. Given our history, I was a little taken aback by her offer, but I appreciated her stepping in. When the time came, the party was in full swing. My mother-in-law arrived with the cake. She placed it on the table, and since everything seemed to be running smoothly, neither Kane nor I thought to check it right away. We were caught up in greeting guests, mingling, and just enjoying the celebration. We simply trusted that the cake was in good condition, as my mother-in-law had promised. When it was finally time for us to cut the cake, my mother-in-law seemed unusually eager to take part in the moment. She excitedly told everyone she wanted to unveil the cake herself, which I found odd, but didn't think much of. However, what followed left me speechless. She revealed the cake, and written across it in bold, mocking letters were the words, "Cheers to 365 days of gold digging." Kane and I were completely stunned. We just stared at the cake, confused and unsure if we were reading it right. The room, which had been filled with smiles and laughter just moments before, suddenly fell silent. Everyone else was equally shocked, their expressions changing from excitement to discomfort as they saw the cruel message. Without missing a beat, my mother-in-law whipped out her phone and immediately took a picture of our faces, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. Then, she burst out laughing, completely unfazed by the tension she had just created. Kane, visibly upset, asked her what the hell she was doing. I could see the anger rising in him as he tried to comprehend how his own mother could find this situation funny. At first, my mother-in-law seemed to brush it off, casually saying she just wanted to see our reaction when we read the cake. But Kane pressed her, asking whether she had deliberately had this written on the cake, and if so, what it even meant. That's when she shrugged and said, "Oh, come on, Kane, it's just a cake. You and your wife are way too tightly wound. Chill out. I just wanted to have a little fun." I thought it would be funny to put that message on the cake. I was completely humiliated at this point. I couldn't believe she would do something so mean-spirited, especially at an event meant to celebrate our marriage. I straight up asked her, who exactly was this supposed to be funny for? Because no one here seems to be laughing. My mother-in-law, still trying to downplay the situation, rolled her eyes and insisted that I was overreacting, making it seem like I was the problem. She said I was turning a lighthearted situation into something bigger than it needed to be. According to her, the message on the cake was just a joke, a harmless jab aimed at me. But standing there with everyone staring, I could tell that no one else saw it as a joke. It was a cruel attempt at humiliation disguised as fun. My husband, clearly furious, but trying to remain calm, turned to his mother and asked her why she would do something so hurtful. Without any hesitation, my mother-in-law went on to say something that absolutely floored me. She said, "Well, I can't be the only one who's thought of her as a gold digger, can I? After all, she comes from a low-income family and has married into a wealthy one. I intended this as a prank, so don't get too upset about it." I was completely horrified. I gasped audibly, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. I had never felt so humiliated, so exposed. It was like she had torn down every bit of dignity I had in front of our friends and family. I couldn't believe she actually said that out loud, and for a moment, I was completely speechless, unsure if I should cry or walk out. But before I could even process her words, Kane stepped in. Without missing a beat, he told his mother that she had crossed the line and needed to apologize immediately. His voice was firm, and it was clear he wasn't going to tolerate any further disrespect. He informed her that she had spoken too much and that if she didn't apologize to me, then he would have no choice but to ask her to leave our house. I could see my mother-in-law's face harden as Kane stood his ground. She scoffed at him, acting as if his reaction was completely unreasonable. She looked around the room, clearly trying to gauge the reactions of the guests, before gesturing dramatically and saying, "Oh, come on, Kane, you can't seriously be throwing me out over something so silly." Her dismissiveness only made things worse. Everyone in the room could feel the tension escalating, and it was becoming clearer by the second that this was no silly matter. It was a direct attack on me disguised as a joke, and my husband wasn't going to let her get away with it. But she was acting like she was untouchable, thinking that Kane wouldn't dare ask her to leave in front of all our friends and family. But I could see in Kane's eyes that he was serious. He wasn't about to let her continue humiliating me, no matter how she tried to play it off. Also, I had absolutely had enough at that point. I stood by my husband and told my mother-in-law that she needed to apologize right then and there, or she would have to leave our party. Instead of showing any remorse, my mother-in-law just rolled her eyes and said, "Okay, now this is getting overly dramatic. Let's just let this whole thing go. We don't even have to cut the cake if you're so upset about this." Her dismissiveness only made me angrier. I scoffed and reminded her that this was our wedding anniversary cake, a cake that Kane had thoughtfully arranged to celebrate a special milestone in our marriage. This was supposed to be our moment, and she had hijacked it with a message that was completely inappropriate and hurtful. And to make matters worse, she was now acting like it was no big deal, refusing to take responsibility for it. I pointed all of this out to her, making it clear that she had crossed a major line. At that point, my mom and sister, who had both been watching everything unfold, stepped in to support me. They told my mother-in-law politely, but firmly, that what she had done was far from funny. It was deeply disrespectful and hurtful to me, and by extension, to Kane. My mother-in-law, who had clearly started to feel cornered, began to act even more defensively. She dramatically turned to the rest of the party guests and asked if they really thought she had done something so terrible. Some of the guests, thankfully, voiced their support for us. They agreed that what she had done was inappropriate, and I think hearing their reactions made her even more irritated. You could see her frustration building as she realized she wasn't going to get the validation she was hoping for. Finally, she rolled her eyes again and turned to me with an exaggerated sigh. She said, "Fine, you want an apology? I'll give you one." But her apology was far from genuine. It was half-hearted at best, and after muttering a weak apology for writing the message on the cake, she immediately followed it up with more insults. She added that I needed to stop getting my panties in a bunch over a cake, and that if I'd let this slide, we could have laughed about this prank in the future, but that my oversensitivity ruined everything. It wasn't an apology at all. It was just another way for her to dismiss my feelings and make me feel small in front of everyone. She wasn't truly sorry. She was just trying to save face and continue making me feel like I was the problem. It was infuriating. At that point, I was beyond frustrated and hurt, so I told her exactly what I'd been holding in for too long. I reminded her, in front of everyone, that she needed to grow up and stop playing stupid pranks on people when she knew very well that this was one of the biggest reasons why her marriage had fallen apart. That they were why father-in-law had finally left her just 2 months ago. For context, my mother-in-law has a long history of pulling distasteful, thoughtless pranks on her family. Earlier this year, father-in-law had gone on his annual vacation with 2 of his male best friends from high school, something they had done for years. It was a simple trip, nothing extravagant, just a chance for the 3 of them to relax, catch up, and enjoy each other's company. These trips were special to father-in-law because he only saw his friends once a year, and it was a time he cherished. I had heard from Kane that over the years, mother-in-law had a habit of pulling pranks to get father-in-law to come home quickly, even when there was no real reason for him to rush back. She had been warned by him multiple times to stop, and there was even one instance where father-in-law threatened to leave as she continued pulling these pranks. For a while, she had backed off, but then this year, she crossed the line again. Right before father-in-law's vacation, mother-in-law had come down with a flu. Father-in-law was genuinely concerned about her and offered to cancel his trip, but since the tickets were non-refundable and me and Kane had promised to take care of her while he was away, she insisted he go on vacation with his friends. Father-in-law even told her he'd have his phone on him at all times and that she could call him if there was an emergency. He wanted to enjoy the trip but also ensure that mother-in-law was okay, so he put every safeguard in place to make sure she was comfortable while he was away. Despite this, mother-in-law pulled her most outrageous prank yet. Not even 2 days into father-in-law's vacation, mother-in-law called him in the middle of the night, completely hysterical, hyperventilating, and telling him that she was experiencing all the symptoms of a heart attack. Father-in-law, understandably terrified, urged her to call 911 immediately. But instead of doing that, she began going on about how much she loved him and how if she were to die that night, he shouldn't grieve for too long and should move on with his life. Father-in-law was in complete panic at this point, thinking he was about to lose his wife, and he immediately called us, urging Kane and me to go check on her as soon as possible. He was so worried that he said he was booking the first flight back home, cutting his trip short without a second thought. Kane and I were alarmed by father-in-law's panic, so we called mother-in-law right away to let her know we'd be calling 911 to get her the medical attention she needed. But instead of agreeing to get help, mother-in-law continued to act as if she was seriously ill, insisting that we come to her first before calling emergency services. It felt suspicious, but given the situation, we couldn't take any risks, so we rushed to her place, fearing the worst. When we arrived, we were absolutely appalled by what we found there. She was perfectly fine, lounging on the couch, eating chips and watching TV as if nothing had happened. Kane and I were stunned, standing there in disbelief. When she saw the looks on our faces, she started laughing as though it was all one big joke. She casually told us that it had all been a prank. She said she wanted to test whether father-in-law still loved her enough to drop everything and rush home for her. Kane and I were furious. We couldn't believe she had faked a medical emergency, especially something as serious as a heart attack, just to get attention. We immediately called father-in-law to stop him from cutting his vacation short, but by then, it was too late. Father-in-law, who had been terrified of losing mother-in-law, had already boarded his flight and was on his way home. It was only when he landed and listened to the voicemails we left explaining that mother-in-law was fine and the whole thing had been a sick prank did he realize the truth. He was crushed, exhausted, and angry, realizing that he'd rushed back for nothing, manipulated by mother-in-law's need for validation. That prank had deeply hurt father-in-law, and it was the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. He couldn't handle her constant games anymore, especially when they involved something as serious as his love and concern for her health. Long story short, father-in-law and mother-in-law had an explosive fight after that disastrous prank, and it finally led father-in-law to ask for a divorce the very next day. Father-in-law packed up and moved out, refusing to engage with her unless it was strictly related to their divorce proceedings. My mother-in-law, of course, couldn't accept any responsibility for the breakup. Instead, she began playing the victim, telling everyone that father-in-law had left her out of nowhere and that maybe he was going through some kind of midlife crisis. Kane and I knew the truth, but we decided to stay out of her narrative. This wasn't our fight, and frankly, we had enough on our plates without getting involved in their divorce drama. However, now that mother-in-law had publicly humiliated me at our anniversary party, I had finally reached my breaking point. I thought it was time someone stood up to her and taught her a lesson. So, I didn't hold back. I told her, in front of everyone, that it was obvious she hadn't learned her lesson after father-in-law left her. I reminded mother-in-law of how her thoughtless pranks had literally driven her husband away. She stood there stunned as I laid it all out. I told her that this wasn't just about a cake with a hurtful message, it was about her complete lack of respect for other people's feelings. She had ruined her own marriage because of this, and now she was trying to ruin my anniversary with the same kind of cruelty. She had continued to be a nuisance, playing the same childish games that had ruined her own marriage. I said flat out that she was acting like an immature child and needed to grow up. The room went completely silent after I said that. My mother-in-law spluttered in embarrassment, and for once, she didn't have a snarky comeback. I think hearing the truth about her own actions and being confronted with the consequences of her behavior in front of everyone hit her harder than she expected. She gestured to me to stop, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. I told her that if she insisted on behaving like a child, then she needed to be punished like one. I went on to say that if she didn't change her ways, I would cut off all contact with her and that I would make sure our future children would have nothing to do with her either. Hearing this, I could see some of the guests around us stifling laughter as we talked to her like I would berate a child, which only seemed to infuriate her even more. Her face turned red with anger as she realized that not only had she lost control of the situation, but she had become the object of ridicule. She glared at me with daggers in her eyes, clearly seething. She then turned on her heels and stormed out of the party without another word. Watching her leave felt like a small victory, but it also left me thinking that maybe this wasn't over. My mother-in-law had been put in her place, but knowing her, this wouldn't be the last time she tried to stir up trouble. However, for the moment, Kane and I had stood our ground, and that was what mattered. We were a team and had not let her bully us. Suffice it to say, not a single person at the party came to defend my mother-in-law after she left. In fact, everyone felt like she got exactly what she deserved. People saw her for who she truly was, and it was clear that her actions had crossed the line. Kane threw away the cake, and we continued on with our celebration without a second thought about my mother-in-law. However, since that party, my mother-in-law has been calling me nonstop, demanding that I apologize to her for humiliating her in front of everyone. She's even gone so far as to threaten that if I don't, she's going to sue me for defamation, since now the story has gotten around and people have been calling her out for lying to them about why she and father-in-law are getting a divorce. She says I had no right to share such private information about her life, and that she is disgusted by me. Honestly, it's laughable. She has no grounds to stand on, and it's clear that this is just another one of her desperate attempts to flip the narrative and make herself the victim once again. I've spoken the truth, and the truth is not defamation. She humiliated herself by pulling that cruel stunt, and now she's scrambling to save face. Kane and I both know there's no legal basis for her threat, and frankly, I'm not about to let her scare me into backing down. I'm done playing her games. If she wants to make this a legal battle, she'll only end up embarrassing herself further, but I doubt it will go that far. This is just another one of her attempts to bully and manipulate, and it's not going to work this time. To answer some of your questions, first of all, yes, my mother-in-law has a history of pulling pranks on us, even before this latest disaster. One example that really sticks out is what she did on our wedding day. While I was getting my hair and makeup done, she actually stole my wedding dress and hid it somewhere. I didn't realize it at first, but as the clock was ticking closer to the ceremony, I still hadn't put the dress on. I started to panic. I was in full-on crisis mode, frantically looking for the dress. It wasn't until I had a mini meltdown that she finally returned my dress, laughing at me as if it was the most hilarious joke. At the time, I remember thinking it was incredibly odd and cruel, especially on such an important day, to play such a prank on me. But then I chalked it up to my mother-in-law just being her strange, insensitive self. After all, she and I weren't particularly close, so I figured this was just how she operated. Though looking back, I can't believe I let it slide. I genuinely thought she might change after father-in-law left her. I assumed that going through such a painful experience would make her reflect on her behavior and maybe mature a little. But clearly, I was wrong. Despite everything that's happened, my mother-in-law is still the same. She hasn't learned anything from the fallout of her marriage, and she continues to treat serious situations like opportunities for her twisted fun. Secondly, if my mother-in-law had put something else on the cake, I might have brushed it off as a poorly thought-out prank. But the fact that she chose to write gold digger was beyond inappropriate. It struck a nerve because it's not just an insult, it's an attack on my character and my relationship with Kane. Sure, Kane is wealthier than I am, but that doesn't mean I entrapped him into marrying me just because he has more money. We dated for a long time before we made the decision to get married, and our relationship is built on love and mutual respect, not on any financial gain. I love Kane for who he is as a person, not for what he can provide for me. To have my mother-in-law imply otherwise was not only disrespectful, but also deeply hurtful. It shows just how out of touch she is and how sick her sense of humor has become. She's clearly so wrapped up in her own insecurities and twisted worldview that she thinks it's acceptable to make such a hurtful joke at my expense, especially on a day meant to celebrate our love. After this latest incident, I genuinely believe something is wrong with her. Her inability to recognize the severity of her actions and the impact they have on others is alarming. I think she really needs to get herself checked, both for her own sake and for the sake of her relationships. If she continues down this path, she's going to alienate everyone around her. Kane had a serious conversation with his mother after she threatened to sue me. He made it clear that there was absolutely no way I would be apologizing to her for what happened. When he told her that, she threw an absolute fit. It was almost as if she thought he'd back down or somehow come to her defense. But Kane stood firm. He told her she could be as angry as she wanted with him, but she could never direct any of that anger towards me again. And that's when she tried to play the victim card, claiming that I had hurt her feelings and that as her son, he should be supporting her. But Kane didn't waver. He reminded her that he was my husband and that I came first, no matter what. He wasn't going to allow her to manipulate the situation or twist the narrative to paint herself as the victim. Clearly furious, my mother-in-law disconnected the call without saying another word. A short while later, she sent him a long text message that dripped with drama. In it, she lamented how she gave birth to him and sacrificed herself to bring him into this world. She claimed that despite all she had done for him, he continued to disrespect her. It was exhausting to read, as it reeked of guilt-tripping and manipulation. After he didn't respond to her message, she left me several voicemails claiming I was alienating her son during such a difficult time in her life. She insisted that all I needed to do was stay quiet about the prank she pulled. Once again, she accused me of being a gold digger, suggesting that this had been my plan all along, to separate Cain from his family so I could have him all to myself. She threatened that she is eventually going to expose me for who I truly am. Honestly, at this point, she sounds bonkers. Both Cain and I realized that her refusal to acknowledge her own behavior and her attempts to manipulate us is just further evidence of how toxic this whole situation has become. Let's just say I'm really glad that my husband has committed to setting boundaries, and I couldn't be more grateful for his support. Together, we are determined not to let her toxic antics tear us apart. It's been 3 months since our last update, and Cain and I have officially had no contact with his mother. After her relentless harassment for weeks, we felt we had no choice but to block her. It's unfortunate that it has come to this, but she clearly is incapable of understanding the damage she's caused. She never got the apology she wanted from me, and honestly, she never will. As for father-in-law, he did eventually find out about the cruel prank mother-in-law had pulled on me during our anniversary. He had reached out to me after the incident to express his regret and told me how sorry he was that I had to deal with her antics. He shared that she had pulled similar stunts on him multiple times throughout their marriage, which is ultimately what broke down their marriage. Hearing this from him felt both validating and heartbreaking. It was a reminder that this was not just some isolated incident, but part of a much larger pattern of behavior that had caused a lot of pain to everyone around my mother-in-law. Additionally, her continuous disregard for her actions is one of the main reasons why father-in-law couldn't attend our anniversary party, as he actively avoids attending events where my mother-in-law will be present. Currently, father-in-law and mother-in-law are going through a bitter divorce, and from what I gather, she's doing everything she can to make things harder for him. It's sad to see their relationship deteriorate like this, but it's also clear that father-in-law deserves to be free from her manipulation and toxicity. I genuinely hope he finds peace soon. He's been through so much, and no one should have to endure the kind of emotional games she plays. In the meantime, Cain and I are focusing on our life together, setting strong boundaries and supporting each other. It's a shame that our family dynamics have become so complicated because of what my mother-in-law did, but we're committed to prioritizing our well-being and happiness.